Dallas carried a strange kind of tension that Monday morning, an electricity usually felt before historic moments, moments that don't look dramatic from the outside but somehow press against the very air of a city. People didn't know exactly why they felt restless. They just knew something was coming. Something political. Something loud. Something that might change the direction of Texas politics. All because of one woman. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. And the question everyone was whispering, from coffee shops to sidewalks to radio stations, was the same: will she or won't she? Today at 4:30 p.m., she was finally expected to reveal whether she would stay in her safe House seat or leap into the unpredictable battlefield of a U.S. Senate race. In the CBS News Texas newsroom, reporter Trevor Sahaki walked in with the kind of alertness that only big political moments create. He wasn't tired, though he should have been. He wasn't anxious, though he could have been. He was simply focused, laser-focused, because this story was the kind journalists wait years to get. A story that could shift power lines and alter careers. The screens at the front of the newsroom glowed with maps of Texas districts, redrawn boundaries, early polling numbers, and live feeds from Austin and Dallas. The newly realigned District 30 blinked like a neon puzzle piece, waiting for someone to claim it. Trevor opened his laptop, stared at the line he'd typed the night before: "Democrats believe she will run for Senate, but it's an uphill battle either way," and whispered it again under his breath. Texas hadn't elected a Democrat statewide in over 30 years, long enough for generations to grow up without ever seeing a blue statewide winner. Running for Senate wasn't just hard. It was nearly impossible. His phone buzzed. A strategist texted him, "We think she's going for it." Not "she will," not "confirmed," just "we think." No one actually knew. That was the thrilling part. Jasmine was brilliant, bold, and famously unpredictable. Even people close to her couldn't always read her final decision. Trevor leaned back, whispered, "All right, Jasmine, surprise us," and kept working. Meanwhile, in Oak Cliff, the sunlight washed over Friendship West Baptist Church, a place heavy with history and influence. Jasmine had attended services there the previous Sunday, and the timing had raised eyebrows from Dallas to Washington. Friendship West wasn't just a church, it was a political pulse point. And its senior pastor, Frederick Haynes III, was quietly considering a run for Jasmine's seat if she moved on. His interest alone had sparked a wave of whispers that grew into tremors across Texas political circles. If Jasmine moved up, District 30 would instantly transform into the most watched open seat in Texas. And Mark Vesey, a Fort Worth congressman with ambition and name recognition, was rumored to be weighing the race too. A single decision from Jasmine could redraw more than just the map, it could redraw careers. In her downtown Dallas apartment, Jasmine Crockett stood in front of a mirror, staring at a reflection that looked composed but carried the weight of thousands of conversations, late-night strategy sessions, and quiet doubts. Her apartment felt like a command center, papers spread across tables, laptops open to spreadsheets and polling, advisors murmuring while pacing. Coffee cups sat half-empty, abandoned mid-thought. She was wearing a simple black suit. Not glamorous. Not casual. A suit for someone about to step into a moment that would follow her for the rest of her political life. Behind her, Malcolm, her most trusted advisor, scrolled through the polling once again. She asked him the same question she'd asked him a dozen times: "Can I win the general?" He paused, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he didn't want to say it the wrong way. Finally, he looked at her. "In the primary? You're leading. Some polls even have you ahead by a comfortable margin." She nodded slowly. That much she knew. But the general? "Jasmine, Texas is Texas," he said softly. "If new voters turn out, if people who don't usually vote feel inspired by you, if the electorate expands, you can do it. But it's a gamble. A real one." She looked out the window at the Dallas skyline. Her House seat was safe. Easy. Predictable. But Jasmine had never been easy or predictable. Safety had never been her motivation. Outside her office building, news vans lined up by mid-afternoon. Journalists rushed with equipment. Microphones were clipped to podiums. Producers barked directions. A simmering sense of history in the making spread over the parking lot. Even national outlets had shown up just in case Texas was about to shock the country again. At 4 p.m., Trevor stood in front of the cameras. His jacket was straight, his mic was clipped, but his heartbeat was as quick as everyone else's. He went live. We are outside Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's district office, where she is expected to announce whether she will seek re-election or run for the United States Senate. This comes just 1 hour before the Texas filing deadline. His professional tone masked the suspense he felt inside. Inside the building, the briefing room filled quickly. The air carried the heat of camera lights and the quiet tension of reporters waiting for a story that could redefine their news cycle. Microphones crowded the podium. Every reporter had their phone pointed forward, ready to capture the first word she said. Behind the closed door, Jasmine took a deep breath. Her staff stood in a circle around her. Malcolm adjusted her jacket. Another advisor handed her the final draft of the speech. A young staffer read out the updated polls in a quiet, shaky voice. But Jasmine wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking. Thinking about her district. Thinking about Texas. Thinking about what it meant to lead instead of follow. Thinking about the difference between holding power and transforming something with it. Thinking about how many people had told her she couldn't win, couldn't lead, couldn't change anything. She stepped toward the door. The room fell silent the moment she entered. Not quiet, silent. A silence made of attention, anticipation, and the awareness that the next few words she spoke would echo long after the microphones were turned off. She reached the podium. The flashes exploded like tiny bursts of lightning. Every head lifted. Every breathing slowed. She placed her hands lightly on the sides of the podium. She looked across the room. She inhaled. And then she began to speak. She began to speak, her voice steady but charged with something deeper, something that made every reporter lift their pen just a little higher. Jasmine had always been a bold speaker, but today there was a quiet intensity in her tone, the kind that made people lean forward without realizing it. She didn't jump straight into an announcement. Instead, she talked about the state of Texas, the people who felt unseen, unheard, or forgotten in a political system that rarely changed. She spoke about growing up in a place where hope had to be earned the hard way. She talked about communities who were told to wait their turn, or accept the status quo, or settle for whatever they could get. She spoke about justice, representation, and the responsibility of leadership. The room was so still that even the sound of a camera clicking seemed loud. Finally, after building her narrative like a heartbeat climbing toward a decision, Jasmine paused. She looked directly at the sea of reporters, each one suddenly aware they were seconds away from the moment that had pulled this entire city into suspense for days. I've always believed, she said softly, that leadership means stepping up when it matters, not when it's comfortable. And today, I'm choosing to step up. The silence cracked with a wave of whispers, fingers tapping phones, reporters scrambling to transmit the moment even before she finished speaking. And then she delivered the line that would appear on every evening newscast, every article, every political podcast for the next 24 hours. I will be running for the United States Senate. The words landed with the force of something much larger than sound, something that shifted energy in the room. Reporters surged forward with questions. Staff members braced for the storm. Her comms director stepped up, trying to create order from chaos. Trevor stared at Jasmine for a full second longer than he realized. He had expected this, yes. But hearing it spoken aloud, with that confidence, with that conviction, made the moment feel heavier, realer, more consequential. He signaled to his cameraman and rushed outside to go live again. Outside, the crowd of reporters exploded into activity. Phones rang. Tweets fired. Producers inside newsrooms yelled across desks. Trevor stepped in front of the camera, breath barely catching up with him, and reported the announcement with the kind of urgency that comes from knowing you're witnessing a political earthquake as it happens. Inside the building, Jasmine continued taking questions. She spoke about expanding the electorate, about campaigning across communities often ignored in Senate races, about her belief that new voices, young, minority, first-time voters, were the key to flipping Texas. She didn't pretend it would be easy. She didn't promise miracles. She simply promised to fight. And that honesty, more than anything, was what made the room take her seriously. When the conference ended, reporters chased her with final questions, but her staff wrapped around her like a shield. As she headed toward the back hallway, her face shifted, not to fear, not to regret, but to a quiet recognition of the path she had just chosen. A path that was far longer, far harder, and far riskier than the one she had left behind. She stepped into a small private room, finally away from cameras. Malcolm closed the door behind them. For a moment, the two simply looked at each other. "Well," Malcolm said, exhaling with a half-laugh, "there's no turning back now." She smiled, but it wasn't a carefree smile. It was the smile of someone who understood the weight she had placed on her own shoulders, and still chose to carry it. Across town, the ripple effects began instantly. At Friendship West Baptist Church, Pastor Frederick Haynes sat in his office when his phone started vibrating non-stop. Texts from supporters, congregants, activists, and political operatives filled his screen. She announced, "It's official. District 30 is open. Are you running?" Inside the church, people whispered excitedly in the hallways. His name floated from room to room, spoken with curiosity, hope, and expectation. Pastor Haynes leaned back in his chair, folded his hands thoughtfully. The idea of running had always been theoretical, something discussed quietly in political circles. But now that the seat was truly open, the weight of the decision felt real. His decades of leadership, community work, and activism had prepared him for many things. But Congress? That was a different calling. He closed his eyes, letting the noise of his buzzing phone fade into the background. He wasn't someone who made decisions out of ambition. If he ran, it would be because he believed the people needed him, not because the opportunity had simply appeared. Meanwhile, miles away, Congressman Mark Vesey stood in his living room, watching the news coverage with an expression that mixed calculation and curiosity. He'd always had strong political instincts, and District 30, newly redrawn, heavily Democratic, rich with community influence, was suddenly glowing like an open door. He muted the TV, stared at the map on the screen, and tapped his finger against his thigh. He was experienced, well-connected, and well-funded. But a race involving Pastor Haynes? That wouldn't be simple. The battle lines were not drawn yet, but the battlefield was forming in front of him. Back at her apartment, long after the press frenzy ended, Jasmine finally had a moment alone. She took her shoes off, sat on the edge of her couch, and stared out at the Dallas skyline glowing against the early night. The city looked calm, almost peaceful, completely unaware of how much noise would fill it tomorrow. Her phone lit up with messages. Congratulations. Warnings. Requests for interviews. Offers to help. Opinions from every direction. She responded to a few, ignored most, then simply placed her phone face down on the table. She didn't need anyone's voice right now. She needed her own. The next months would be brutal: fundraising, traveling, speeches, debates, criticism, attacks, long nights, impossible expectations. But she felt something else too. Something she hadn't expected. She felt alive. Because she had chosen not the easy path, not the safe path, but the meaningful one. The one that demanded bravery. The one that required vision. The one that could reshape the future of her state. Across Texas, political operatives worked late into the night. Teams assembled. Pollsters recalibrated. Donors made calls. Opponents sharpened their messaging. And everyday Texans, scrolling through their phones in bed, saw the news and wondered if this would finally be the year something changed. Cab drivers talked about it. Teachers mentioned it in break rooms. Students debated it on group chats. Twitter, or whatever remained of it, burned with reactions. Everyone had an opinion. But only Jasmine had to live with the choice. She stood, walked to her window, and placed a hand on the cool glass. The city lights reflected faintly in her eyes. Somewhere inside, fear and resolve and hope all blended into one steady feeling. Whatever happened next, she had stepped into the arena. And the arena was ready for her.